The stone walls of Saint. Mary's held their secrets as tightly as Mother Superior held her wooden staff. On this grey October morning in 1893, the orphan girls stood in perfect rows across the chapel floor, their bare feet cold against the flagstones despite woolen stockings. Bridget O'Sullivan pressed her lips together, counting the familiar faces around her. 23 girls, ages 7 to 16, all bearing the same hollow look of children who had learned not to ask for what would never come. Mother Superior's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade through silk. Sister Catherine has informed me that questions were asked in the dormitory last night. Her pale eyes swept across the assembly, and several girls instinctively stepped backward. Questions about the fate of those who leave us. Questions about the world beyond these walls. Questions that violate our most sacred rule. Bridget felt her stomach clench. She knew which girl had whispered in the darkness. Young Mary Fitzgerald, barely 8 years old, who had sobbed herself to sleep wondering where her older sister had gone after turning 16 3 months ago. The same question that burned in Bridget's own mind, though at 14 she had learned to keep such thoughts locked away like forbidden treasures. The rule of silence exists for your protection, Mother Superior continued, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. To ask questions is to invite doubt. To doubt is to invite sin. To sin is to forfeit your place in God's grace and in this sanctuary. She lifted her staff and struck it once against the stone floor. The sound rang out like a bell, and every girl flinched. The girl who broke this rule will step forward now. Bridget watched Mary's small frame begin to tremble. The child's face had gone white as fresh linen, and her eyes darted desperately around the room as if seeking escape. But there was nowhere to run in Saint Mary's. The doors were locked from the outside, the windows set too high, and the walls too thick to carry even the loudest scream beyond their bounds. I am waiting. Mother Superior's fingers tightened on her staff. The guilty party will present herself, or all will suffer for the sins of one. The threat hung in the air like incense smoke. Bridget had witnessed collective punishment before. A week without meat, extra hours of prayer, the withdrawal of their one small privilege of Sunday afternoon walks in the enclosed garden. She could not let 22 innocent girls bear the weight of Mary's frightened curiosity. But as Bridget opened her mouth to speak, she caught sight of something that made her pause. Sister Catherine stood near the far window, partially hidden in shadow, and her hands were moving in small, precise gestures behind her back. The movements were so subtle that only someone with Bridget's particular affliction would have noticed them. Her inability to focus her attention in the way normal girls did, the way her eyes constantly darted to movement and detail. Others missed entirely. Sister Catherine's fingers were spelling out letters in the sign language she had once glimpsed in a book about the deaf. The letters formed a single word. Wait. Bridget's heart hammered against her ribs. In the 3 years since her parents' death from fever had brought her to Saint Mary's, she had never seen Sister Catherine break protocol in any way. The young nun was known for her strict adherence to rules, her perfect posture during prayer, her absolute silence during meals. Yet here she was, sending a secret message to a 14-year-old orphan girl. Mother Superior took a step forward, her black habit rustling like the wings of a great crow. Very well. If the guilty will not confess, then all will fast for 3 days. No food but bread and water. No warmth but what God provides. No comfort but prayer and penitence. Young Mary let out a small whimper, and Bridget saw her sway on her feet. The child was already too thin, like most of them, living on the meager portions that were all Saint Mary's could afford. 3 days of bread and water might leave the smaller girls too weak to stand. However, Mother Superior continued, raising her staff again, there is another way. If someone wishes to take responsibility for maintaining order in the dormitory, someone who will ensure that such questions are never asked again, then perhaps God's mercy might extend to a different form of penance. Bridget understood immediately. Mother Superior was offering her a chance to become an informant, a guardian of the rule of silence among her fellow orphans. It was a role that would exempt her from the worst punishments, while requiring her to betray the trust of the only family she had left. Sister Catherine's hands moved again behind her back, spelling out a different message. Trust me. The chapel fell into absolute silence. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Bridget's decision. She could feel the desperate hope radiating from the younger girls, their faith that someone older and braver would save them from hunger and cold. At the same time, she sensed the watchful attention of the older girls, who knew exactly what Mother Superior was asking and what it would cost. Bridget stepped forward, her worn shoes clicking against the stone. I will take the responsibility, Mother Superior. A smile touched the corners of Mother Superior's thin lips. Very good, child. You understand what this means. You will be my eyes and ears in the dormitory. Any whispered conversations, any questions about the outside world, any violation of our sacred rule, you will report directly to me. Do you accept this duty? The words stuck in Bridget's throat like thorns. To agree would make her an enemy to every girl in the room. To refuse would condemn them all to slow starvation, but Sister Catherine's message had been clear. Trust me. And something in the young nun's steady gaze suggested that there was more to this bargain than appeared on the surface. I accept, Bridget whispered. Mother Superior nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. Your first task begins tonight. Sister Catherine will instruct you in your new duties. She turned to address the assembly. Let this be a lesson to all. Questions lead to sorrow. Curiosity leads to corruption. Obedience leads to salvation. The morning prayers that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Bridget knelt with the others, reciting the familiar Latin words, but her mind raced with questions of her own. What had Sister Catherine meant? Why had she risked secret communication? And most pressing of all, what would happen when night fell and her new role as guardian of silence began? As the girls filed out of the chapel for their morning chores, Bridget felt their eyes on her like physical weight. Some looked at her with hatred, others with disappointment, and a few of the youngest with something that might have been gratitude. But it was the look in Mary Fitzgerald's eyes that cut the deepest, a mixture of relief and terror that told Bridget the child understood exactly who had saved her from Mother Superior's wrath. The day passed in a blur of scrubbing floors and tending the vegetable garden. Bridget worked alongside the others, but conversation died whenever she approached. By evening, she was as isolated as if she had been placed in solitary confinement. The other girls spoke to her only when necessary, their voices cold and formal, their faces turned away. After supper, a thin soup and hard bread that was barely enough to satisfy their hunger, Bridget made her way to Sister Catherine's small chamber near the chapel. She knocked softly on the wooden door, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Enter, came the quiet voice from within. Bridget stepped into the sparse room. Sister Catherine sat at a small wooden table, writing in a leather-bound ledger by candlelight. She looked up as Bridget entered, and for a moment they simply stared at each other in silence. Close the door, Sister Catherine said finally. Bridget obeyed, then stood waiting near the entrance, unsure whether she should speak first or wait for instruction. Sister Catherine set down her pen and folded her hands in her lap. What I am about to tell you must never be repeated to Mother Superior or anyone else. Do you understand? Bridget nodded, though her mouth had gone dry with fear and curiosity. The girl who disappeared last month, Sarah Quinn. She did not go to work in a respectable household, as Mother Superior announced. She was sold to a factory in Dublin where girls work 16 hours a day in conditions that would shock even the poorest farmers. Many become ill from the machines and the air. Some die. The words hit Bridget like a physical blow. She had known Sarah Quinn, a quiet girl of 15 who had always been kind to the younger children. The thought of her trapped in some hellish factory, slowly dying from exhaustion and poisoned air, made Bridget's stomach turn. But why are you telling me this? Bridget whispered. If Mother Superior finds out? Mother Superior receives payment for each girl she sends to the factories, Sister Catherine interrupted. It is House Saint. Mary survives when donations are not enough. The church hierarchy knows and approves, believing it teaches the girls the value of honest labor. Bridget sank into the room's single chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. All of them? Everyone who leaves when they turn 16? Not all. Some go to domestic service, as promised, but many do not. And there is no way to know which fate awaits you until the day comes. Sister Catherine's voice remained steady, but Bridget could see the pain in her eyes. I have been keeping records, trying to trace what happens to our girls after they leave. It is dangerous work. If I am discovered, I will be sent away from Saint. Mary's and you will lose your only ally. The word ally sent a shock through Bridget's system. She had not expected friendship or support from any of the sisters. They were as bound by rules and hierarchy as the orphan girls themselves. What do you want me to do? Bridget asked. Learn to read people instead of reporting on them, Sister Catherine replied. When girls whisper in the dormitory, discover what they truly need instead of simply silencing them. If someone is planning to run away, help them do it safely rather than betraying them to Mother Superior. Bridget's mind reeled with the implications. You want me to help girls escape? I want you to help them survive. Sometimes that means escape. Sometimes it means finding other ways to protect them. Sister Catherine opened the ledger and showed Bridget pages covered in careful handwriting. These are the records I have been keeping. Names, dates, destinations when known, and outcomes when I can discover them. Study these when you can, learn the patterns. And most importantly, learn to distinguish between the girls who ask dangerous questions because they are planning something foolish, and those who ask because they are beginning to understand the truth. Bridget stared at the pages of names, many of them familiar. Girls who had been older sisters and protectors to her in her early days at Saint. Mary's. Girls who had simply vanished one day with a brief announcement of their good fortune in finding employment. How long have you been doing this? She asked. Since I arrived here 2 years ago. I was young and idealistic then, believing I could change things through proper channels. I have learned that some changes must happen in darkness, slowly and carefully, like seeds growing under stones. A sudden sound from the corridor outside made them both freeze. Heavy footsteps approached, then passed by without stopping. Sister Catherine quickly closed the ledger and tucked it away in her desk drawer. Remember, she whispered urgently, to Mother Superior you are the perfect informant. Report small infractions, girls talking after lights out, minor rule violations that earn them extra chores, but nothing worse. This will satisfy her need for control while protecting the girls from real harm. And watch for the signs I will show you. If a girl is in immediate danger, there are ways to get word to me. Bridget nodded, though her head spun with the complexity of the deception she was being asked to maintain. What about Mary Fitzgerald? She is the one who asked the questions. Mary is 8 years old and has 8 years before she faces the choice between factory and service. There is time to prepare her, to teach her skills that might help her avoid the worst fate. But for now, your job is to keep her curiosity alive while teaching her to hide it better. As Bridget made her way back to the dormitory, her mind churned with everything Sister Catherine had revealed. The stone walls that had always felt like protection now seemed like prison barriers. The routine prayers and chores that had provided structure to her days now felt like training for a life of unquestioning servitude. But most disturbing of all was the realization that she was no longer simply an orphan waiting for her fate to be decided by others. She had become a player in a dangerous game where the stakes were the lives and futures of every girl in Saint Mary's. The dormitory was already dark when she slipped inside, but she could hear the soft breathing of 22 other girls and knew that many were still awake despite the late hour. As she settled onto her narrow bed, a small hand touched her arm through the darkness. Bridget! Mary Fitzgerald's voice was barely audible. Are you really going to tell on us now? The question hung in the darkness, like a prayer waiting for an answer. Bridget thought of Sister Catherine's ledger, of Sarah Quinn working herself to death in some Dublin factory, of the choice between truth and safety that awaited every girl in this room. No, she whispered back. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to be very, very careful about the questions you ask and who might hear them. Mary's small fingers squeezed her arm gratefully, and Bridget felt the weight of her new responsibility settle around her shoulders like a cloak made of shadows and secrets. In the morning, she would begin learning to be two people at once: the loyal informant Mother Superior expected, and the secret guardian Sister Catherine needed. But tonight, lying in the darkness, surrounded by the soft breathing of sleeping girls, Bridget O'Sullivan made a silent promise to herself and to them all. She would find a way to keep them safe, even if it meant breaking every rule she had ever been taught to follow. 3 weeks had passed since Bridget accepted her role as Mother Superior's informant, and the careful balance she maintained grew more precarious with each passing day. She sat in the chapel during morning prayers, her fingers wrapped around her wooden rosary beads, listening to the familiar Latin words, while her mind catalogued the small infractions she would report later. Annie Walsh speaking during silent work time, Catherine Murphy hiding bread in her sleeve, nothing that would earn more than extra scrubbing duties or an hour of additional prayer. Mother Superior stood at the altar, her voice carrying across the stone space with its usual authority. Today marks the feast of St. Catherine of Alexandria, patron saint of unmarried women and scholars. It is fitting that on this day we welcome a visitor who embodies the Church's commitment to the education and moral guidance of young women. Bridget looked up sharply, her attention caught by the unfamiliar note of anticipation in Mother Superior's voice. Visitors to St. Mary's were rare. Occasional priests, sometimes a local benefactor checking on the progress of their charitable donations, but never anyone who warranted such formal announcement during prayers. The chapel door opened with a creak that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. A man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the black coat and white collar of a church official. But there was something different about him. His step was too confident, his gaze too calculating as it swept across the rows of orphan girls. When his eyes met Bridget's for a brief moment, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold. "Father Thomas Brennan comes to us from the diocese offices in Cork," Mother Superior continued. "He will be conducting evaluations of our older girls to determine their readiness for placement in Christian households. This is a great honor and opportunity for those who have proven themselves worthy through obedience and proper conduct." Father Brennan stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was smooth as honey poured over gravel. "Young women, I am here to assess which among you are prepared to take your place in God's plan for your lives. Over the next few days, I will be speaking with each girl individually, examining your skills in reading, writing, household management, and most importantly, your commitment to Christian virtue." Bridget's stomach clenched with unease. She had heard similar speeches before, but something in Father Brennan's tone suggested that his version of assessment would be far more thorough and far more dangerous than the usual perfunctory interviews that preceded placement. After prayers, as the girls filed out to begin their morning chores, Bridget felt a light touch on her shoulder. She turned to find Sister Catherine beside her, her face carefully neutral but her eyes urgent. "Father Brennan has requested to speak with you first," Sister Catherine said quietly. "Mother Superior is quite pleased. She considers your recent cooperation to be exemplary." The words were clearly chosen for any listening ears, but Bridget caught the warning beneath them. Her new role as informant had made her visible to Mother Superior in ways that might not be entirely safe. "When am I to meet with him?" Bridget asked. "This afternoon, after the midday meal. You are to present yourself in Mother Superior's office wearing your cleanest dress and with your hair properly braided." Sister Catherine's voice remained steady, but she pressed something small and hard into Bridget's palm. "Remember what we discussed about being observant?" Bridget nodded and slipped whatever Sister Catherine had given her into the pocket of her worn apron. As she made her way to the laundry room where she was assigned to work that morning, her mind raced with possibilities. Why would a church official from Cork travel all the way to their small orphanage to personally evaluate the girls? And why had Mother Superior seemed so eager to present Bridget as an example of proper behavior? The laundry room was filled with steam and the sharp scent of lye soap. Bridget worked alongside 3 other girls, scrubbing bed sheets and undergarments in large wooden tubs while trying to appear focused on her task. But her attention was actually fixed on the conversation taking place in the next room, where Mother Superior and Father Brennan were discussing arrangements for his visit. "The O'Sullivan girl has shown remarkable improvement in her attitude," Mother Superior was saying. "3 weeks ago, she was harboring the same rebellious tendencies as the others, but she has proven herself capable of understanding her proper place." "Excellent," Father Brennan replied. "I am particularly interested in girls who have demonstrated the ability to adapt their behavior when properly motivated. Such flexibility suggests they will be successful in positions that require discretion and unquestioning obedience." Something in his tone made Bridget's skin crawl. She glanced around the laundry room to see if the other girls had heard, but they were absorbed in their work, heads down and hands busy. Only Mary Fitzgerald, who was hanging clean linens on the drying lines, seemed to be listening with the same intensity that Bridget felt. The morning passed slowly, each minute stretching like hours as Bridget anticipated her meeting with Father Brennan. During the midday meal, thin soup and dark bread, the same as always, she noticed that several of the older girls seemed unusually quiet. 16-year-old Rose Kennedy, who was known for her cheerful chatter even in the face of strict rules about silence during meals, sat staring at her bowl without eating. 15-year-old Margaret O'Brien kept glancing toward the head table where Mother Superior sat with their visitor, her face pale and drawn. After the meal, Bridget hurried to the dormitory to change into her cleanest dress, a gray wool garment that had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric. She braided her dark red hair as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror, then checked her appearance in the small piece of polished metal that served the entire dormitory. As she prepared to leave for Mother Superior's office, she remembered the object Sister Catherine had pressed into her palm that morning. She pulled it from her pocket and found a small brass button, the kind used on military uniforms. At first, she was puzzled by its significance. But as she turned it over in her fingers, she noticed that one side had been filed smooth and polished to a mirror finish. Understanding dawned like sunrise after a long night. Sister Catherine had given her a way to see behind herself, to observe what might be happening outside her direct line of sight. It was a spy's tool, disguised as an innocent bit of brass. Mother Superior's office was located on the second floor of the main building, reached by a narrow stone staircase that amplified every footstep. Bridget climbed slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. When she reached the heavy wooden door, she paused for a moment to steady her breathing, then knocked softly. "Enter," came Mother Superior's voice from within. Bridget pushed open the door and stepped into the office, a room she had only seen a handful of times in her 3 years at St. Mary's. The walls were lined with religious paintings and shelves of leather-bound books. A large wooden desk dominated the center of the space, and behind it sat Mother Superior in her high-backed chair. Father Brennan stood near the window, his silhouette dark against the gray afternoon light. "Ah, Bridget," Mother Superior said with what might have been approval. "Come in, child. Father Brennan wishes to speak with you about your future." Bridget approached the desk, her hands clasped in front of her in the posture that had been drilled into all the girls since their arrival. She kept her eyes downcast in the manner expected of orphan girls in the presence of authority, but she angled the brass button in her palm so she could see Father Brennan's reflection in its polished surface. "Look at me, child," Father Brennan said, moving away from the window. Bridget raised her eyes obediently, meeting his gaze with what she hoped appeared to be respectful attention. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 35, with dark hair and sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. "Mother Superior tells me you have shown remarkable progress in understanding your duties here at St. Mary's," he said, circling around to stand beside her chair. "That you have learned the value of cooperation." "Yes, Father," Bridget replied quietly. "Good. Very good." He moved behind her chair, and Bridget used the brass button to watch his reflection. His hands hovered near her shoulders without quite touching, and she had to force herself not to flinch away. There are opportunities available for girls who demonstrate proper obedience and discretion, positions in households where their services would be highly valued. Mother Superior leaned forward across her desk. Tell Father Brennan about your work as dormitory monitor, child. How you have helped maintain order among the younger girls. This was the moment Bridget had been dreading. She had prepared careful lies about minor infractions and small violations of dormitory rules, nothing that would bring serious punishment on any of her fellow orphans. But looking into Father Brennan's sharp eyes, she realized that her carefully crafted deceptions might not be enough to satisfy his expectations. I watch for girls who speak after lights out, she said slowly. I report when someone hides food from meals or fails to complete their assigned prayers. And have you discovered any more serious violations? Father Brennan asked. His reflection in the brass button showed him leaning closer, though his voice remained conversational. Perhaps girls who ask inappropriate questions or express discontent with their situation here. Bridget's mouth went dry. This was exactly the kind of questioning she had hoped to avoid, the demand for information that could destroy lives rather than simply earn extra chores. She thought of Mary Fitzgerald's frightened face, of the whispered conversation she had overheard about girls who had disappeared, of Sister Catherine's ledger filled with names and fates. The younger girls sometimes wonder about their families, she said carefully, but I remind them that Saint Mary's is their family now, and that such thoughts lead only to unhappiness. Wise counsel, Mother Superior interjected approvingly. You see, Father Brennan, how well she has learned to guide others toward proper thinking. But Father Brennan's reflection in the brass button showed him frowning slightly, as if her answer had not provided what he was seeking. And the older girls? Those approaching 16. Do they never express concerns about their upcoming placement? The question hung in the air like incense smoke, heavy with unspoken implications. Bridget realized that this was not simply an evaluation for domestic service. Father Brennan was looking for something specific, some particular kind of information about the girls who would soon be leaving St. Mary's. They are eager to begin their adult lives in service to Christian families, she lied smoothly. They understand that it is God's plan for them. Of course they do, Father Brennan said, but his tone suggested disappointment. He moved back around to face her directly, abandoning whatever game he had been playing with positioning and proximity. Tell me, child, what do you know about the arrangements made for girls when they leave this place? The question was more direct than Bridget had expected, and she felt a trap closing around her words before she could speak them. If she claimed complete ignorance, she would appear useless as an informant. If she revealed too much knowledge, she would expose Sister Catherine's dangerous record-keeping and her own growing understanding of what really happened to the girls. I know that Mother Superior finds them positions in good Christian households, she said finally. That they are trained here to be useful servants and moral women. And you have never wondered what becomes of them after they leave? Never noticed which girls seem to disappear entirely from contact, while others occasionally send letters back to their friends here? Bridget's heart stopped. Father Brennan knew about the letters, or rather the lack of them. He understood that some girls vanished completely while others maintained contact, and he was testing to see how much she had observed about this pattern. I have noticed that some girls are better at writing letters than others, she said, choosing her words as carefully as if she were walking across thin ice. And that some find positions far from here, where it would be difficult to maintain correspondence. Father Brennan smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Very diplomatic, child. You have learned well how to say much while revealing little. This is precisely the kind of intelligence I am seeking. He turned to Mother Superior. I believe this girl would be suitable for the special placement I mentioned. Her ability to observe without appearing to do so, combined with her demonstrated loyalty to authority, makes her an ideal candidate. Special placement? Bridget asked before she could stop herself. Mother Superior's eyebrows rose at the breach of protocol. Orphan girls were not supposed to ask questions about their futures, but Father Brennan seemed pleased by her curiosity. A household in Dublin where discretion is particularly valued, he explained. The family has business interests that require absolute confidentiality from their domestic staff. Girls who serve them well find themselves very comfortably situated indeed. The words sent ice through Bridget's veins. She thought of Sister Catherine's records, of girls who had been sent to factories disguised as domestic service, of the careful distinction the young nun had drawn between legitimate placement and something far more sinister. "I am honored by your consideration, Father," she managed to say. "The placement would not take effect immediately," Father Brennan continued. "You would remain here for another year, continuing your excellent work as dormitory monitor until you reach 16, but it is good to have such matters arranged in advance. It gives everyone time to prepare properly." After the interview, Bridget made her way back to the dormitory in a daze. The other girls watched her approach with a mixture of curiosity and fear. They knew she had been singled out by the visiting priest, but they could not know whether this meant opportunity or danger for their designated informant. That evening, during the hour between supper and evening prayers, when the girls were allowed to mend their clothes and tend to personal needs, Bridget found an opportunity to speak quietly with Mary Fitzgerald. The 8-year-old was sitting in a corner, darning a hole in her stocking with careful stitches that were far too neat for a child her age. "Mary," Bridget whispered, settling beside her with her own needlework. "I need to tell you something important, but you must promise never to repeat it to anyone." Mary's eyes grew wide, but she nodded solemnly. "The man who came today, Father Brennan, he is not here to find us good homes with kind families. He is looking for girls who will do exactly what they are told without asking questions, even if what they are told to do is wrong." "What do you mean?" Mary asked, her voice barely audible. Bridget glanced around to make sure no one else could hear them. "Some of the girls who leave here do not go to regular domestic service. They go to places where they are made to work in terrible conditions, or worse. And Father Brennan is looking for girls who are smart enough to be useful but obedient enough not to cause trouble." Mary's face went pale. "Are they going to take you away?" "Not for a year," Bridget replied. "But Mary, I need you to listen carefully. You must learn to read and write as well as you possibly can. You must learn to sew and cook and manage household accounts. But most importantly, you must learn to think for yourself while appearing to follow orders without question." The child's brow furrowed with confusion. "How can I do both?" "By asking your questions silently, inside your own mind. By watching and remembering everything you see. By being twice as smart as they think you are." Bridget tied off her thread and looked directly into Mary's eyes. "Can you do that?" Mary nodded slowly. "I think so, but Bridget, what about the other girls? Rose and Margaret and the others who are almost 16. Before Bridget could answer, the bell rang for evening prayers. As the girls filed into the chapel, Bridget caught sight of Sister Catherine near the altar, arranging candles with her usual precision. Their eyes met for just a moment, and the young nun gave an almost imperceptible nod. Later that night, long after lights out, Bridget lay awake listening to the breathing of 22 other girls and thinking about the choice that Father Brennan had presented to her. She could accept his special placement and disappear into whatever Dublin household required servants who asked no questions about the business conducted within its walls. Or she could find a way to resist, knowing that resistance would likely mean punishment not just for herself, but for any girl suspected of supporting her rebellion. In the darkness, she heard soft footsteps approaching her bed. A hand touched her shoulder gently, and Sister Catherine's whispered voice reached her ear. "Tomorrow night, after midnight prayers, the chapel." Then the footsteps retreated, leaving Bridget alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that her year of preparation for whatever fate awaited her had just become much shorter. As she finally drifted toward sleep, her last conscious thought was of the brass button still hidden in her apron pocket and the reflection it had shown her of Father Brennan's face when he thought no one was watching. The cold calculation in his eyes had not been that of a priest evaluating orphan girls for domestic service. It had been the look of a man appraising merchandise for a very different kind of market entirely. The chapel bells struck midnight as Bridget slipped from her narrow bed, her bare feet finding the cold stone floor without a sound. Around her, 22 other girls breathed deeply in sleep, exhausted by the day's labor and evening prayers. She had learned to move like a ghost through the dormitory during her weeks as Mother Superior's informant, and now those skills served a different purpose entirely. The corridor outside the dormitory stretched into darkness, lit only by thin moonlight filtering through high windows. Bridget made her way toward the chapel, her nightgown providing little protection against the October cold that seeped through the ancient stone walls. Each step felt like a small betrayal of the safety that sleep offered. Once she reached the chapel and heard whatever Sister Catherine had to tell her, there would be no returning to the simple role of obedient informant. The chapel door stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but deeper darkness within. Bridget pushed it open just wide enough to slip inside, then closed it carefully behind her. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom while listening for any sound that might indicate she was not alone. "Here." Sister Catherine's voice came from near the altar, barely above a whisper. Bridget made her way forward, her hands trailing along the wooden pews for guidance. As she approached the front of the chapel, a small flame flickered to life. Sister Catherine lighting a single candle behind the altar where its glow would not be visible from the windows. In the candlelight, Sister Catherine looked younger than her 25 years, her face drawn with exhaustion and something that might have been fear. She gestured for Bridget to sit in the front pew while she remained standing, the ledger Bridget recognized from their first meeting clutched in her hands. "Father Brennan left this evening," Sister Catherine said without preamble. "But before he departed, he met privately with Mother Superior for nearly 2 hours. I was able to overhear portions of their conversation." Bridget felt her stomach clench with anticipation. "What did they discuss? You, primarily, and the other girls who will turn 16 in the coming year?" Sister Catherine opened the ledger, her fingers finding a page marked with a strip of cloth. "Father Brennan was very pleased with what he called your adaptability. He believes you would be suitable for what he described as specialized domestic service." "What does that mean exactly?" Sister Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the open ledger. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but filled with a sadness that made Bridget's chest tighten with dread. "There are houses in Dublin, and in London, and other large cities, where wealthy men go to conduct business that cannot be conducted in respectable establishments. These houses require young women who are attractive enough to serve as decoration, intelligent enough to remember complex instructions, and obedient enough never to speak of what they witness." The words hit Bridget like physical blows. She understood now why Father Brennan had seemed less like a priest and more like a merchant evaluating goods. "They are selling us." "Not selling exactly. The arrangement is more complex than that." Sister Catherine turned several pages in the ledger, revealing columns of names, dates, and notations in her careful handwriting. "The church receives substantial donations from these establishments, money that supports orphanages like St. Mary's and funds missionary work. In exchange, they provide a steady supply of young women who have been trained in obedience and have no family connections to complicate matters." Bridget stared at the pages, seeing familiar names listed alongside destinations and outcomes. Sarah Quinn, who had supposedly gone to domestic service, was marked as Dublin, Pemberton House, status unknown. 3 other girls from the past year were listed with similar notations. "How long have you known about this?" Bridget asked. "I began to suspect within months of my arrival here. Too many girls were disappearing completely after their placement, with no word ever reaching their friends. When I tried to trace their whereabouts through official church channels, I was told that such inquiries were inappropriate and potentially harmful to the girls' new situations." Sister Catherine turned to another page, this one filled with what appeared to be a code of letters and numbers. "I began keeping my own records, and eventually I found ways to gather information from unofficial sources. A laundress who had worked in one of the Dublin houses, a priest who had become troubled by what he witnessed during his pastoral visits. Gradually, I pieced together the truth." "And you have been planning to expose this?" "I have been planning to save as many girls as possible. Exposure would only result in my removal and replacement with someone who would ask no questions at all. The system would continue, and the girls would have no one watching over them." Bridget felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night. "What about the girls who are not chosen for Specialized service? What happens to them? Some do go to legitimate domestic service, as promised. Others go to factories or workhouses where conditions are harsh, but not morally corrupting. The key is learning to make yourself unsuitable for the specialized placements while still appearing to be a model of obedience. How? Sister Catherine closed the ledger and looked directly at Bridget. By becoming indispensable here at St. Mary's. By demonstrating skills that make you more valuable as an assistant to the sisters than as a servant in Dublin. And by ensuring that other girls develop the same indispensable qualities. The plan that Sister Catherine outlined was both simple and terrifyingly complex. Bridget would continue her role as dormitory monitor, but instead of merely reporting minor infractions, she would begin teaching the older girls skills that legitimate employers would value highly. Advanced needlework, basic accounting, even rudimentary Latin for households that entertained educated visitors. Mother Superior will approve, because these skills make the girls more attractive to respectable employers, Sister Catherine explained. She can command higher placement fees for girls with such accomplishments. But the real purpose is to give each girl options, skills that allow them to seek employment independently if necessary, and knowledge that helps them recognize dangerous situations. And the younger ones, like Mary, they have time to develop even more extensive abilities. I can teach reading and writing in secret, using religious texts as primers. Basic mathematics disguised as assistance with household accounts. Most importantly, critical thinking skills that will help them navigate whatever future they face. As Sister Catherine spoke, Bridget began to understand the true scope of what she was being asked to undertake. This was not simply about saving a few girls from terrible fates. It was about systematically undermining the entire arrangement between St. Mary's and the Dublin houses, creating a generation of young women too skilled and too aware to be easily exploited. There is one more thing, Sister Catherine said, her voice dropping even lower. Father Brennan mentioned that he would return in the spring to finalize arrangements for next year's placements. He also indicated that he might accelerate the timeline for certain girl if circumstances required it. Meaning, if any girl shows signs of becoming problematic, she might be removed earlier than her 16th birthday. The official reason would be that an exceptional opportunity had arisen, but the real purpose would be to prevent her from influencing others. Bridget felt the trap closing around them. So we have perhaps 6 months to prepare everyone, while being careful not to appear too prepared. Exactly. And there is another complication. Sister Catherine moved to the window, peering through the glass toward the main building. Mother Superior has decided that your success as dormitory monitor should be expanded. Beginning next week, you will be assisting with the instruction of the younger girls in household skills. This will give you more access to them, but it will also make your activities more visible. The weight of responsibility settled on Bridget's shoulders like a heavy cloak. In accepting the role of informant, she had thought she was choosing between betraying her fellow orphans and protecting them from hunger. Now she understood that she had actually been chosen for a far more dangerous game. One where the stakes were not just comfort or punishment, but the very souls and futures of every girl in St. Mary's. What if I refuse? She asked quietly. What if I simply tell Mother Superior that I no longer wish to serve as dormitory monitor? Then you will be sent away within the month, Sister Catherine replied without hesitation. Father Brennan was very clear that girls who show signs of attitude problems should be removed quickly to prevent contamination of the others. Your only protection is to appear completely loyal while secretly working against everything you appear to support. They spent the next hour planning in detail. Bridget would begin teaching advanced needlework to the older girls under the guise of preparing them for positions in wealthy households. Sister Catherine would provide books and materials hidden within religious texts and prayer manuals. Most critically, they would develop a system of signals and codes that would allow them to communicate dangerous information without being overheard. Remember, Sister Catherine said as she extinguished the candle, everything you do must appear to serve Mother Superior's interests. Every skill you teach the girls must seem designed to make them more valuable servants. Every piece of knowledge you share must appear to promote obedience rather than independence. As they prepared to leave the chapel, Bridget grasped Sister Catherine's arm. "Why are you risking this? If you are discovered, you will face far worse consequences than any of us." Sister Catherine was quiet for a moment, her face hidden in the darkness. "Because I took vows to serve God and protect the innocent. What is happening here is an abomination that corrupts everything the Church claims to represent. If I do nothing, I am complicit in evil." They separated at the chapel door, Sister Catherine returning to the sisters' quarters, while Bridget made her way back to the dormitory. As she slipped between her thin blankets, her mind raced with plans and possibilities. She had 6 months to transform a group of obedient orphan girls into young women capable of recognizing and resisting exploitation. But first, she had to survive tomorrow's expanded duties without arousing Mother Superior's suspicion about her midnight activities. The next morning brought new challenges immediately. During breakfast, Mother Superior announced that Bridget would begin assisting with the instruction of the younger girls in household management, starting with lessons in proper table service and kitchen organization. The other girls watched this announcement with expressions ranging from envy to suspicion, advancement within saint. Mary's hierarchy was unusual and often came with hidden costs. "You will work with Sister Margaret in the kitchen each afternoon," Mother Superior continued, "teaching the children aged 8 to 12 the skills they will need when they begin more serious domestic training. This is a significant responsibility, and I trust you understand the importance of maintaining proper discipline." Bridget nodded respectfully while her mind raced with the implications. Sister Margaret was known for her strict adherence to rules and her immediate reporting of any unusual behavior to Mother Superior. Teaching under her supervision would make secret instruction nearly impossible, unless Bridget could find ways to embed hidden lessons within the approved curriculum. The morning passed in the usual routine of prayers and chores, but Bridget found herself studying everything with new eyes. The way the sisters moved through the corridors, the timing of their various duties, the moments when supervision was lightest and conversation might be possible. She was no longer simply an orphan girl marking time until her placement. She had become a spy in her own home, gathering intelligence for a resistance that existed only in shadows and whispered conversations. During the midday meal, she noticed that Rose Kennedy was absent from her usual place at the table. When she quietly asked Margaret O'Brien about it, the older girl's face went pale. "Rose was called to Mother Superior's office this morning," Margaret whispered. "She has not been seen since." Ice formed in Bridget's chest. Rose Kennedy was 15, still months away from her 16th birthday. If she had been removed suddenly, it could only mean that she had said or done something to mark herself as potentially problematic. That afternoon, as Bridget began her first lesson with the younger girls in the kitchen, she found ways to work subtle questions into the instruction. While teaching them to properly arrange place settings, she asked if any of them had spoken with Rose recently. While demonstrating the correct way to fold napkins, she inquired whether Rose had seemed troubled or upset. The picture that emerged filled Bridget with dread. Rose had been asking questions about her older sister, who had left Saint Mary's 2 years earlier, and had never sent a single letter home. She had also been caught reading a newspaper that someone had left behind after a visit from the local priest, behavior that violated the rule against seeking information about the outside world. "Sister Margaret," Bridget said carefully as they supervised the girls' practice at setting tables, "will Rose be returning for evening prayers? Several of the younger girls have been asking about her." Sister Margaret's expression hardened. "Rose Kennedy has been blessed with an early placement opportunity. She departed this morning to begin service with a family in Cork who had immediate need of her skills." The lie was delivered with such conviction that Bridget almost believed it herself. But she had seen Sister Catherine's ledger, had learned to recognize the patterns of truth and deception that governed Saint Mary's. Rose had not gone to domestic service in Cork. She had been removed because she asked too many questions, and her fate was likely far darker than any of the younger girls could imagine. As evening prayers began, Bridget found herself staring at the empty space where Rose should have been kneeling. The other girls noticed too, their eyes darting to the gap in their ranks with expressions of confusion and fear. Mother Superior's voice droned through the familiar Latin phrases, but Bridget heard different words entirely. Warnings and threats wrapped in the language of salvation. That night, as she lay in her bed, listening to the whispered conversations of girls who were trying to understand Rose's sudden disappearance, Bridget made a silent promise to the darkness. She would not let fear paralyze her into inaction. She would not allow the system that had claimed Rose Kennedy to continue operating in shadows and lies. Starting tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous work of her life, teaching her fellow orphans not just to survive, but to resist. But first, she had to figure out how to do it without joining Rose in whatever darkness had claimed her. Winter had settled over Saint. Mary's like a shroud, and with it came a visitor that no one expected. Bridget stood with the other girls in the courtyard, their breath forming white clouds in the bitter February air as they waited for Mother Superior to explain the sudden assembly. 4 months had passed since Rose Kennedy's disappearance, and Bridget had used every one of those days to quietly prepare her fellow orphans for the dangers that awaited them beyond the stone walls. The lessons had been subtle but effective. During afternoon instruction in the kitchen, she had taught the younger girls to read not just recipes but newspapers, using the scraps that occasionally found their way into the orphanage. While demonstrating proper household accounting, she had shown the older girls how to hide small amounts of money and how to recognize when wages were being unfairly withheld. Most importantly, she had taught them all to ask questions silently and observe everything, even when they appeared to be focusing only on their assigned tasks. "Children," Mother Superior announced, her voice cutting through the winter wind, "we are honored today by a visit from Inspector Cornelius Hartwell of the Dublin Metropolitan Police. He is here to investigate certain irregularities that have come to the attention of the authorities." Bridget's blood turned to ice water. Beside her, Mary Fitzgerald gripped her hand with fingers that trembled from more than cold. The other girls shuffled nervously, their eyes darting between Mother Superior and the tall, severe-looking man who stood beside her. Inspector Hartwell wore a dark uniform and carried himself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Inspector Hartwell will be interviewing selected girls about their experiences here at Saint. Mary's Mother Superior continued, "You will answer his questions truthfully and completely. Any attempt to mislead or deceive him will be considered a grave sin and will be punished accordingly." The inspector stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled girls like a hawk evaluating potential prey. When his gaze settled on Bridget, she felt exposed, despite her careful months of maintaining the appearance of perfect obedience. "I understand that there have been concerns raised about the placement procedures for girls who reach the age of 16, Inspector Hartwell said, his voice carrying the authority of law and government. "Anonymous letters have been sent to church authorities and civil officials, making serious accusations about the treatment of orphan girls from this institution." Bridget's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone had been writing letters about Saint. Mary's. But who? And how had they gained access to information about what really happened to the girls who left? "These accusations are completely unfounded," Mother Superior interjected quickly. "Saint Mary's has an exemplary record of placing our girls in respectable Christian households where they serve with honor and gratitude." Inspector Hartwell's expression remained neutral. "Nevertheless, I am required by law to investigate all claims of impropriety involving the welfare of children. Over the next 3 days, I will be conducting private interviews with girls of various ages to determine the truth of these allegations." As the girls filed back inside for morning prayers, Bridget caught sight of Sister Catherine near the chapel entrance. The young nun's face was carefully composed, but her hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Sister Catherine gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, a warning that made Bridget's stomach clench with dread. The interviews began immediately after the midday meal. Inspector Hartwell had been given use of the small parlor typically reserved for visits from church officials, and one by one the girls were called to speak with him privately. Bridget watched as Margaret O'Brien disappeared into the room for nearly an hour, emerging pale and shaken. When 12-year-old Catherine Murphy was summoned, She was inside for only 10 minutes before stumbling out with tears streaming down her face. "What is he asking?" Mary Fitzgerald whispered as they sat in the common room, supposedly mending torn stockings but actually straining to overhear any sounds from the parlor. "I do not know," Bridget replied quietly, "but we must be very careful. Inspector Hartwell may be here to help us, or he may be here to identify which girls have learned too much about what really happens when we leave." That evening, as they knelt for prayers in the chapel, Bridget noticed that Mother Superior seemed unusually agitated. The older woman's voice stumbled over familiar Latin phrases, and her eyes kept darting toward the door as if she expected unwelcome visitors to arrive at any moment. Father Donnelly, the elderly priest who conducted their weekly confession sessions, appeared equally nervous as he assisted with the service. After prayers, as the girls prepared for bed, Sister Catherine appeared in the dormitory doorway. "Bridget O'Sullivan," she announced in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mother Superior requires your presence in her office immediately." The walk to Mother Superior's office felt like a march toward execution. Bridget's mind raced through everything she had said and done over the past months, searching for any misstep that might have revealed her secret activities. When she knocked on the office door, her hand trembled despite her efforts to remain calm. "Enter," came Mother Superior's sharp voice. Bridget stepped inside to find not only Mother Superior, but also Inspector Hartwell seated in the chair typically reserved for visitors. Both adults watched her with expressions that revealed nothing of their intentions. "Sit down, child," Mother Superior commanded, gesturing toward a wooden stool that had been placed in the center of the room. Bridget obeyed, placing her hands in her lap and keeping her eyes downcast in the manner expected of orphan girls in the presence of authority. But she angled her body slightly so that she could observe both adults in her peripheral vision, watching for any signs of what they knew or suspected. Inspector Hartwell leaned forward in his chair. "Miss O'Sullivan, I understand that you serve as a monitor in the dormitory, responsible for maintaining order among the younger girls." "Yes, sir," Bridget replied quietly. "And in that capacity, you would be aware of any unusual conversations or activities among your fellow orphans?" "Yes, sir." "Have you observed any girls expressing dissatisfaction with their situation here at St. Mary's? Any complaints about the food, the living conditions, or the rules they are required to follow?" Bridget felt the trap closing around her words. If she claimed that no girl had ever complained, she would appear either dishonest or remarkably unobservant. But if she admitted to overhearing complaints, she might be betraying girls who had trusted her with their honest feelings. "The younger girls sometimes miss their families," she said carefully. "And everyone wishes the food was more plentiful and the dormitory warmer in winter. But we understand that St. Mary's provides what it can with the resources available." Inspector Hartwell nodded as if this answer satisfied him. "And what about concerns regarding placement procedures? Have any girls expressed fear or reluctance about leaving St. Mary's when they reach 16? This question struck directly at the heart of everything Bridget had been trying to protect. She thought of the conversations she had overheard between older girls, their whispered fears about what awaited them beyond the stone walls, their desperate questions about sisters and friends who had vanished without sending word of their new lives. "Some girls are nervous about leaving the only home they remember," she replied. "But they trust that Mother Superior will find them good situations with kind families." "Of course they do," Mother Superior interjected with obvious relief. "Our girls are raised to have faith in the wisdom of their elders and the providence of God." But Inspector Hartwell's expression suggested that her answer had not entirely satisfied him. "Miss O'Sullivan, are you familiar with a girl named Sarah Quinn who left St. Mary's approximately 6 months ago?" Bridget's chest tightened. Sarah Quinn was one of the names she had seen in Sister Catherine's ledger, marked as status unknown after her placement in Dublin. "Yes, sir. Sarah was kind to the younger girls and helped in the kitchen." "Have you received any communication from Sarah since her departure? Any letters or messages describing her new situation?" "No, sir." "And does this strike you as unusual? That a girl who was kind to younger children would not write to let them know how she was faring?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Bridget realized that Inspector Hartwell was not simply gathering general information about conditions at St. Mary's. He was specifically investigating the fates of girls who had left the orphanage. Someone had indeed been writing letters to authorities, and those letters had contained enough specific information to prompt an official investigation. I hoped she would write, Bridget said slowly. But I thought perhaps she was very busy learning her new duties, or that her employers did not encourage correspondence with her former home. Inspector Hartwell made a note in the small leather book he carried. And what about Rose Kennedy? I understand she left St. Mary's quite suddenly in October, before her 16th birthday. Bridget's mouth went dry. Rose's disappearance had been the event that convinced her that the danger to the girls was immediate and growing. Rose received an early placement opportunity. She repeated the official explanation she had heard from Sister Margaret. Yes, so I was told. With a family in Cork, according to Mother Superior's records. But the address provided for this family does not exist, and no family by that name is known to the parish priest in that area. The silence that followed was deafening. Mother Superior's face had gone pale, and her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles showed white through her skin. Inspector Hartwell continued to study Bridget with the intensity of a man who suspected he was being lied to, but had not yet determined the extent of the deception. I do not know anything about addresses or parishes, Bridget stammered, which was entirely true even though it avoided the real question of what she suspected about Rose's fate. Of course you do not, Inspector Hartwell said gently. You are only 14 years old, and it would be unreasonable to expect you to understand the complexities of placement procedures. But something in his tone suggested that he understood more than he was revealing. Bridget had the sudden, terrifying thought that Inspector Hartwell might already know the truth about what happened to girls like Sarah and Rose, and that his investigation was designed not to uncover facts but to determine how much the remaining girls had learned about the system that controlled their lives. Miss O'Sullivan, he continued, if you were to discover that some girls from St. Mary's had not been placed in the comfortable domestic situations they were promised, what would you do with that information? The question was so direct that Bridget felt as if she had been struck. Mother Superior made a small sound of protest, but Inspector Hartwell raised his hand to silence her. I would pray for their safety and trust that God would protect them, Bridget said finally. Would you not feel obligated to inform the authorities? To ensure that other girls were not subjected to similar deceptions? I would not know how to contact authorities, Bridget replied honestly. And I would fear that making accusations without proof would be sinful. Inspector Hartwell closed his leather book and stood up. Very good, Miss O'Sullivan. You may return to the dormitory now. As Bridget reached the door, his voice stopped her. One final question. If someone were to offer you assistance in ensuring the safety of your fellow orphans, would you be willing to accept such help? Bridget turned back to face him, her heart pounding so hard she was certain both adults could hear it. I would want to be certain that the person offering help truly had our best interests at heart, sir. Inspector Hartwell smiled for the first time since his arrival at St. Mary's. A wise answer, child. Very wise indeed. As Bridget made her way back to the dormitory, her mind reeled with the implications of what had just occurred. Inspector Hartwell's questions had been far too specific and informed to represent a routine investigation prompted by anonymous complaints. Someone had provided him with detailed information about the orphanage's placement procedures and the fates of specific girls. But was he truly investigating crimes against the orphans? Or was he working with Father Brennan and Mother Superior to identify which girls had become too knowledgeable about the system? And if he was genuinely trying to help them, how could she trust him without endangering the secret network of resistance that she and Sister Catherine had been building? When she reached the dormitory, she found the other girls clustered around Mary Fitzgerald's bed, their faces pale with fear and confusion. Margaret O'Brien looked up as Bridget approached. 3 more girls were called down after evening prayers, Margaret whispered. Annie Walsh, Helen Murphy, and Kathleen O'Connell. None of them have returned. Bridget felt the blood drain from her face. All 3 girls were 15 years old, less than a year away from their 16th birthdays. If they had been removed like Rose Kennedy, it could only mean that the investigation had accelerated the timeline for eliminating potentially problematic orphans. "We have to do something," Mary Fitzgerald said, her 8-year-old voice carrying a determination that would have been remarkable in a woman twice her age. "We cannot just wait for them to take us all away one by one." Looking around at the frightened faces surrounding her, Bridget realized that the careful, gradual resistance she had been planning was no longer sufficient. The investigation had forced their hand, and they now faced a choice between immediate action and slow destruction. Tomorrow night, she would have to break the most fundamental rule of Saint Mary's, the rule that forbade any contact with the world beyond their walls. Whether Inspector Hartwell was friend or enemy, she was going to find out the truth about what had happened to the missing girls. And if necessary, she would ensure that the story of Saint Mary's reached ears that could not be silenced by church authority or government pressure. The sound that woke Bridget in the deepest hour of night was not one she recognized, a low, rhythmic scraping against stone that seemed to come from beneath the dormitory floor. She lay perfectly still in her narrow bed, listening as the sound repeated itself 3 times, paused, then repeated again. Around her, the other girls breathed deeply in sleep, undisturbed by the strange noise that had pulled her from uneasy dreams. 5 days had passed since Inspector Hartwell's visit, and 3 more girls had vanished during that time. The official explanations grew increasingly absurd. Early placement opportunities with families who required immediate service, special training programs in distant convents, even claims of long-lost relatives appearing to reclaim their orphaned kin. But the pattern was unmistakable to anyone willing to see it. Girls who asked too many questions or showed signs of independence were being systematically removed. The scraping sound came again, followed by what might have been a whispered voice. Bridget slipped from her bed and crept to the window, pressing her ear against the cold glass. The sound seemed to be coming from outside, somewhere near the foundation of the building. Moving as quietly as a shadow, she made her way to the dormitory door and eased it open just enough to peer into the corridor. The hallway was empty, lit only by thin moonlight filtering through high windows. But as she listened, she could hear voices, real voices this time, not the phantom whispers that sometimes haunted the stone walls on windy nights. "The foundation is solid here," a man's voice was saying. "If we can create an opening large enough, 3 or 4 girls could get through at once. And you are certain the tunnel connects to the old drainage system?" This voice was female, familiar, but speaking so quietly that Bridget could not immediately identify it. "The maps from the county records are clear. The medieval builders connected all the monastery buildings to the same underground network. It has not been used in decades, but the passages are still intact." Bridget's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone was attempting to create an escape route from Saint Mary's. But who, and for what purpose? The logical explanation was that Inspector Hartwell had discovered evidence of the crimes being committed against the orphan girls and was organizing a rescue operation. But Bridget had learned to distrust logical explanations where Saint Mary's was concerned. She crept back to her bed and lay listening as the scraping sounds continued for another hour. When they finally ceased, she remained awake until dawn, her mind racing through possibilities and plans. If rescue was truly coming, she needed to be prepared to help the other girls escape quickly and quietly. If this was instead a trap designed to identify which orphans were willing to flee, she needed to be ready to protect them from their own desperation. The morning brought unexpected chaos. During prayers, Mother Superior's voice cracked with strain as she announced that Sisters Catherine and Margaret would both be departing Saint Mary's immediately to take up new positions at convents in distant counties. The news struck Bridget like a physical blow. Sister Catherine was her only ally among the religious staff, and her removal could only mean that their secret activities had been discovered. "Sister Catherine will be greatly missed," Mother Superior continued, her pale eyes scanning the assembled girls for any signs of distress. "Her dedication to your moral education has been exemplary. We pray that her new assignment will bring her great spiritual fulfillment." After prayers, as the girls filed out to begin their morning chores, Bridget managed to catch Sister Catherine near the chapel entrance. The young nun's face was composed, but Bridget could see the fear lurking beneath her calm expression. "Sister," Bridget whispered, "when do you leave?" "Within the hour," Sister Catherine replied, her voice barely audible. "But there are things you must know first." She pressed a small object into Bridget's palm, a brass key, warm from her own body heat. "The storage room in the cellar, behind the preserves. Everything you need is hidden there." Before Bridget could ask what she meant, Sister Catherine had moved away to speak with Mother Superior about final arrangements for her departure. Bridget slipped the key into her apron pocket and tried to focus on her assigned task of helping with breakfast preparation, but her mind was reeling with questions and fears. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Bridget worked in the kitchen alongside the younger girls, teaching them to prepare porridge and slice bread, while her thoughts remained fixed on the key in her pocket and the promise of answers it might provide. When the midday meal was finished and the dishes cleaned, she finally found an opportunity to slip away to the cellar. The storage room Sister Catherine had mentioned was tucked behind rows of preserved vegetables and pickled fruits, barely large enough for one person to stand upright. Bridget used the brass key to open a wooden chest that had been hidden beneath empty burlap sacks, and what she found inside made her gasp with shock. The chest contained Sister Catherine's ledger, but also much more. Maps of the local countryside marked with safe houses and sympathetic families, detailed records of girls who had been successfully helped to escape other orphanages, and most importantly, a thick bundle of letters tied with string. The letters were addressed to various church officials, government authorities, and newspaper editors, all describing in careful detail the crimes being committed at St. Mary's and similar institutions. At the bottom of the chest lay a folded piece of paper with Bridget's name written on the outside. She opened it with trembling fingers and found Sister Catherine's familiar handwriting. "If you are reading this, then I have been forced to leave before our work was complete. The letters in this chest must be delivered to the addresses marked in red. These are people who will act on the information they contain. The tunnel being constructed beneath the dormitory will be ready tomorrow night. Inspector Hartwell is not what he appears to be. He works with a group of reformers who have been documenting these crimes for months. Trust him, but trust your own judgment more. The choice of who to save and who to leave behind will be yours alone. May God forgive us all for what we have allowed to continue." See, Bridget sank to her knees in the small storage room, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Sister Catherine had been planning. This was not simply an attempt to save a few girls from terrible fates. It was a coordinated effort to expose and destroy the entire system that trafficked orphan girls to brothels and factories disguised as domestic service. But it was also terrifyingly dangerous. If she attempted to deliver the letters and was caught, she would disappear like Rose Kennedy and the others. If she tried to use the escape tunnel and was discovered, not only would she face punishment, but the other girls would lose their only chance at freedom. That evening, during the hour between supper and prayers when the girls were allowed to mend their clothes, Bridget gathered the older orphans around Mary Fitzgerald's bed under the pretense of helping the 8-year-old repair a torn stocking. "Listen carefully," she whispered, keeping her voice so low that the other girls had to lean close to hear her words. "Tomorrow night, some of us may have the opportunity to leave St. Mary's. Not through official placement, but through other means." Margaret O'Brien's eyes widened with understanding. "An escape route?" "I cannot say more than that. But each of you must decide tonight whether you are willing to risk everything for the chance at freedom, or whether you prefer to remain here and hope for legitimate placement when you turn 16. "What about the younger girls?" asked 14-year-old Helen Murphy. "We cannot leave them behind to face whatever is happening to the others." Bridget had been wrestling with this exact question all afternoon. The tunnel Sister Catherine had arranged would probably accommodate only 4 or 5 girls at once, and attempting to evacuate the entire dormitory would certainly result in discovery and failure. "Some will have to stay," she said finally. "The youngest ones, who have years before they face immediate danger. But we can take the older girls, and those who stay can continue the work of teaching and preparing the others." Mary Fitzgerald, who had been listening with the intense focus of someone far older than her years, spoke up. "I want to stay. Mary, you are only 8. You have the best chance of anyone to escape safely, .. No. The child's voice carried a determination that silenced all protest. Someone has to remain to teach the little ones what you have taught us. Someone has to be the new Sister Catherine for the girls who cannot leave. Looking around at the faces surrounding her, Bridget realized that Mary was right. The resistance they had begun could not end with the escape of a few older girls. It had to continue, growing stronger with each new group of orphans who learned to think for themselves and question the authority that controlled their lives. Very well, Bridget said quietly. Mary will stay, along with the girls under 10. The rest of us will attempt to leave tomorrow night. But even as she spoke the words, Bridget knew that her own choice was already made. She could not abandon Mary and the younger children to face alone whatever consequences would follow the escape. Her role was not to flee to safety, but to ensure that the work of resistance continued even after the system had been exposed and hopefully destroyed. The next day passed in a blur of nervous tension. During morning prayers, Bridget noticed that Mother Superior seemed unusually agitated, her eyes darting constantly toward the windows as if she expected unwelcome visitors. Father Donnelly, who had arrived for his weekly confession sessions, appeared equally disturbed, whispering urgently with Mother Superior during breaks in the religious service. That afternoon, while helping with laundry duties, Bridget overheard a conversation between 2 of the remaining sisters that made her blood run cold. The authorities will arrive tomorrow morning, Sister Anne was saying. Mother Superior received word that the investigation has been expanded to include a full review of our placement records. And the girls who might cause problems? Sister Bernadette asked. Father Brennan is returning tonight with a special transport. Any girl who has shown signs of curiosity will be removed before dawn. Bridget's hands trembled as she continued folding bedsheets, her mind racing with the implications of what she had heard. The escape tunnel would not be ready until tomorrow night, but Father Brennan was coming tonight to collect the girls he deemed dangerous. If she and the others waited for the planned escape, they would be gone long before the tunnel could save them. That evening, as the girls prepared for bed, Bridget made her final choice. Instead of waiting for rescue, she would have to create her own opportunity for resistance. The letters Sister Catherine had prepared would have to be delivered tonight, even if it meant certain capture and punishment. But first, she had one last lesson to teach the girls who would remain behind, as darkness fell over Saint Mary's. Bridget gathered Mary Fitzgerald and the other young orphans around her bed. In whispers so quiet they could barely be heard, she taught them everything Sister Catherine had shared with her. How to recognize the signs of dangerous placement opportunities, how to hide money and documents, how to send secret messages to the outside world if the need arose. Remember, she told them, questions asked silently are still questions. Knowledge gained in secret is still knowledge. And courage shared among friends is stronger than any wall they can build to contain it. As the chapel bells chimed midnight, Bridget O'Sullivan prepared to break the most fundamental rule of Saint Mary's, the rule that orphan girls must accept whatever fate their elders chose for them. Tomorrow, the world would learn the truth about what happened behind the stone walls of the orphanage. Tonight, she would ensure that truth had messengers brave enough to carry it beyond reach of those who preferred darkness to light. The sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones cut through the pre-dawn silence like a knife through silk. Bridget pressed herself against the dormitory window, watching as a black coach pulled by 2 horses approached the main entrance of St. Mary's. Even in the dim light cast by the driver's lantern, she could make out the familiar figure of Father Brennan stepping down from the vehicle, his movements sharp and purposeful. 3 hours earlier, she had completed the most terrifying journey of her life, crawling through the partially completed escape tunnel beneath the orphanage, emerging in the old drainage ditch that ran along the property's eastern boundary, and making her way through 2 miles of countryside to deliver Sister Catherine's letters to the village postmaster. The man had been suspicious of a 14-year-old girl appearing at his door in the middle of the night, but the official seals and addresses on the correspondence had convinced him to accept them for immediate dispatch. Now, as she watched Father Brennan stride toward the entrance with 2 other men whose uniforms suggested official authority, Bridget knew that her actions had set events in motion that could no longer be controlled or reversed. Within hours, investigators would arrive to examine Saint, Mary's records, and interview the remaining girls. The system that had claimed Rose Kennedy and so many others would finally face scrutiny from outside the church hierarchy. But first, she had to survive Father Brennan's final collection. "Wake up," she whispered urgently, moving from bed to bed in the dormitory. "Father Brennan has returned, and he is not alone." The older girls roused quickly, their faces pale with fear in the moonlight streaming through the windows. They had all heard the rumors about what happened to girls who were removed before their 16th birthday, and they understood that being selected for Father Brennan's attention was not the honor Mother Superior pretended it to be. "What do we do?" Margaret O'Brien whispered, her voice trembling with terror. Bridget looked around at the frightened faces surrounding her, girls who had trusted her to protect them, who had learned to ask questions and think for themselves under her guidance. The escape tunnel was still too narrow to accommodate all of them, and even if it had been complete, there was no time to evacuate everyone before Father Brennan reached the dormitory. "We face this together," she said quietly, "and we remember that knowing the truth, even when we cannot escape it, is better than living in ignorance." Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, accompanied by Mother Superior's voice and those of unfamiliar men. The dormitory door opened with a creak that seemed to echo off the stone walls, and lantern light spilled across the floor where 20 girls knelt beside their beds in nightgowns and bare feet. Father Brennan entered first, followed by Mother Superior and the 2 uniformed officials Bridget had seen from the window. One of the men carried a leather portfolio that bulged with documents, while the other bore the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to enforcing unwelcome orders. "Children," Mother Superior announced, her voice strained with what might have been fear or anger. "These gentlemen have come to escort several of our older girls to new situations that require immediate attention. You will pack your belongings quickly and accompany them without question or complaint." Father Brennan stepped forward, consulting a piece of paper in his hand. Margaret O'Brien, Helen Murphy, Catherine Walsh, Kathleen O'Connell. Each name fell like a stone into still water, creating ripples of terror that spread through the assembled girls. "You have been selected for positions of particular responsibility and honor." But as the named girls began to rise with expressions of resignation and despair, one of the uniformed officials cleared his throat loudly. "Father Brennan," the man said in a voice that carried unmistakable authority, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding about the purpose of our visit tonight." Father Brennan turned sharply, his face showing the first crack in his confident demeanor. "Inspector Morrison, we discussed the arrangements. The arrangements have changed." Inspector Morrison opened his leather portfolio and withdrew a thick document bearing official seals. "By order of the Dublin Metropolitan Police and the Department of Child Welfare, Saint, Mary's orphanage is now under official investigation for violations of placement protocols and potential trafficking of minors. No girls will be removed from this institution until a complete review has been conducted." The silence that followed was so complete that Bridget could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Father Brennan's face had gone white with shock and rage, while Mother Superior swayed on her feet as if she might faint. "This is outrageous," Father Brennan sputtered. "The Church has complete authority over the placement of these children." "No civil authority has the right to interfere. The Church's authority ends where criminal law begins," Inspector Morrison interrupted calmly. "We have received detailed documentation describing a systematic pattern of deception regarding the fates of girls from this and several other orphanages. Anonymous correspondence has provided us with names, dates, and locations that we are now investigating thoroughly." Bridget felt a surge of triumph mixed with terror. Sister Catherine's letters had reached their intended recipients and prompted immediate action. But she also understood that Father Brennan and Mother Superior would know exactly who was responsible for providing the authorities with such detailed information. As if reading her thoughts, Father Brennan's eyes swept across the assembled girls and settled on her with laser intensity. "Inspector, I believe you will find that these allegations originate from a single source, a disturbed and rebellious girl who has been spreading malicious lies to cover her own behavioral problems." Miss O'Sullivan, Inspector Morrison said, consulting his own notes. Would you please step forward? Bridget rose on unsteady legs, acutely aware that 20 pairs of eyes were watching her every movement. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, the point where her secret resistance would become public and irrevocable. Miss O'Sullivan, Inspector Morrison continued, are you the person who provided detailed information about placement irregularities at St. Mary's to various government and church authorities? The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Bridget understood that her answer would determine not only her own fate, but the futures of every girl in the dormitory. If she denied responsibility, the investigation might stall for lack of a willing witness. If she admitted her role, she would face immediate retaliation from Father Brennan and Mother Superior. But looking around at the faces of her fellow orphans, Mary Fitzgerald's 8-year-old eyes blazing with fierce pride, Margaret O'Brien's expression of desperate hope, the younger girls who were finally learning that adults could be challenged when they abused their power, Bridget knew there was only one answer she could give. Yes, sir, she said clearly. I provided that information. Father Brennan stepped toward her with fury written across his features. You little... That will be quite enough, Inspector Morrison said sharply, moving to place himself between Father Brennan and Bridget. Miss O'Sullivan is now under the protection of the Dublin Metropolitan Police as a key witness in this investigation. The second uniformed official moved forward and placed a restraining hand on Father Brennan's arm. Father, I must ask you to accompany us for questioning regarding your role in the placement procedures described in the anonymous correspondence. This is a travesty, Mother Superior said, her voice shaking with outrage. St. Mary's has served this community faithfully for decades. We have provided these children with shelter, education, and moral guidance and you will have the opportunity to present that perspective during formal interviews, Inspector Morrison replied. But for now, this institution is under official supervision, and no children will be relocated until we have determined the full scope of any irregularities. As Father Brennan was escorted from the dormitory in restraints, his eyes met Bridget's one final time. The look he gave her was filled with such hatred and promise of retribution that she felt ice form in her veins. Even if he was convicted of crimes against the orphan girls, powerful men like Father Brennan had ways of reaching those who had crossed them. But that fear was overwhelmed by a different emotion as she looked around at her fellow orphans. For the first time in their lives, they had seen adult authority challenged and found wanting. They had witnessed the power of truth spoken courageously in the face of intimidation. Most importantly, they had learned that their own voices and experiences mattered to people outside the stone walls that had contained them. Inspector Morrison turned to address the assembled girls. Children, over the next several days you will be interviewed individually about your experiences here at St. Mary's. Please understand that you are not in trouble, and that anything you tell us will be used only to ensure your safety and the safety of future orphans. Miss O'Sullivan has shown tremendous courage in bringing these matters to light, and her example should inspire you to speak truthfully about what you have witnessed. In the days that followed, St. Mary's was transformed from a place of secrets and silence into something resembling a normal institution for the care of children. New sisters arrived to replace those who had been removed for questioning, bringing with them policies that allowed the girls to ask questions, receive letters from the outside world, and participate in decisions about their own futures. The investigation ultimately revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond St. Mary's, involving dozens of orphanages across Ireland and England. Father Brennan was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his role in trafficking minors, while Mother Superior received a lesser sentence in exchange for testimony about the church officials who had orchestrated the system. But perhaps the most significant change was visible in the girls themselves. Mary Fitzgerald, now 9 years old, had taken over Bridget's role as unofficial teacher and protector of the younger children. She conducted secret reading lessons, using books that were no longer forbidden, organized quiet discussions about the rights and opportunities that awaited them in the outside world, and most importantly, ensured that no girl at St. Mary's would ever again accept without question the claim that she had no choice in her own destiny. Margaret O'Brien and the other older girls were eventually placed in legitimate domestic positions with families whose backgrounds had been thoroughly investigated by government officials. They maintained correspondence with their friends at St. Mary's, providing reassurance that proper placement was not only possible but expected for all the orphans. As for Bridget herself, Inspector Morrison had arranged for her to receive an education at a progressive school for girls in Dublin, funded by donations from benefactors who had been horrified by the revelations about orphanage conditions. She would return to visit St. Mary's regularly, bringing news of the outside world and ensuring that the lessons of resistance and self-determination continued to be passed down to each new generation of orphans. On her final evening at St. Mary's, as she packed her few possessions in preparation for the journey to her new life, Bridget stood at the dormitory window looking out at the countryside that had once seemed like a prison beyond reach. The same fields and forests stretched to the horizon, but everything had changed in the months since Rose Kennedy's disappearance had forced her to choose between complicity and resistance. Mary Fitzgerald appeared at her side, carrying the brass button that Sister Catherine had once given Bridget as a tool for secret observation. "You will need this more than I will," Mary said, pressing the small object into Bridget's palm. "There are other places like St. Mary's, other girls who need someone to teach them that asking questions is not a sin." Bridget closed her fingers around the brass button, feeling its familiar weight and warmth. "And there are girls like you who will ensure that the lessons continue even when the teachers must move on to other battles." As the chapel bells chimed midnight, no longer a sound of confinement, but a reminder that each new day brought fresh possibilities, Bridget O'Sullivan made a silent promise to herself and to all the girls who had not lived to see this transformation. She would spend her life ensuring that no child would ever again be told that curiosity was sinful, that questions were forbidden, or that their fate was entirely in the hands of others. The stone walls of St. Mary's would remain, but they would no longer contain spirits that refused to be broken. The rule of silence had been shattered forever, replaced by voices that would never again be silenced by fear or false authority.